So, this is called the Magick of Comics. Who here are fans of Magic the Gathering? Anybody? Okay, I tricked one of you. Last time I held this panel, a lot more hands went up regarding Magic the Gathering because they thought that that's what this was going to be about, and it wasn't, and I tricked them. This is actually about the history of comics. This is about creating comics. My experience creating comics. If you're unaware, I do have my booth out there, Wilde Comics, where I am self-publishing. I am creating my own books, my own stories. I'm working on a novel right now. It's just under 100,000 words, so hopefully I'll get that out soon. But comics are one of my favorite mediums. It's such a beautiful medium. They are intimate. They only really come to life when they are given that life by the reader. It's such a visual and literary, just totally active experience. You have to be active when you're reading comics, or else you're really not going to get anything out of it. It's not like watching a movie. It's kind of like reading a book, but still not. It's just such a beautiful amalgamation of all these mediums come together. It's like film in that it combined the aspects of theater and writing and all this, but it's just so beautiful of a medium to tell whatever stories you like. Comics aren't just superhero stories. They aren't just Marvel or DC. You can do anything with comics. And that's, again, why I think they are perhaps one of the best artistic mediums there are. Okay, I thought he was coming up to tell me something, whispering sweet nothings into my ear. So I'm going to get started on the history of comics. Comics, as we think of them, began roughly in the early 20th century when comic strips would get reprinted. The fabled comic strips of old. I don't really see them anymore. But somebody had the great idea, let me buy up the rights to these, let me collect them all into books, and I'll start selling there. And as such, we are here where we are today. Then in 1938 or 39, I always get it mixed up, a little character called Superman was born in the pages of Action Comics, #1, and that is what is called the Golden Age of Comics. Is anybody familiar with the various ages and titles of comic bookdom? It goes Golden Age up until roughly 1956 is the Golden Age of Comics. That's when Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, pretty much all the DC characters that you know and love were created. For Marvel, you'd have Namor and the Human Torch, but not the one you're thinking of. This Human Torch was a robot. Then something happened to comics. They were booming and rising, and into the 50s, you had all these various genres. You had romance comics, which are absolutely incredible. If you read them, I highly recommend it. Romance comics were created by a man named Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby is renowned as the king of comics. He is the guy who created pretty much everything you know and love from Marvel. DC, keep going back to everything he created, even though all of these companies treated him terribly. But I'll get to that lovely segment in just a moment. Comics, eventually, like I was saying, it's romance, westerns, crime, anything you can really think of were being published. Horror comics were insanely popular up until parents and the government decided they could not longer be. There were Senate hearings because there were thoughts put out that comics were causing, reckless youths and dangerous children, gangs of wild kids running amok because they read comics. But eventually, the Senate hearings occurred. These comics, which I'll admit they are very gory, especially the horror ones, they were canned. Companies went under, and comics were essentially neutered into the Silver Age. And the Silver Age is where things get weird. It's where things get sci-fi. It's where just the craziest stuff can happen to these superhero characters, because that's really the only genre that survived that 50s senatorial massacre. It was the superhero. Flash created the Silver Age. Flash, of course, he wears the little winged hat, a Mercury himself, Hermes, if you will. So he comes in, blows everybody away, and boom, comic books explode into superhero-dom. And as it continues that way for the next however many decades it has been, through various tumultuous times. Everybody, at least every 5 years, somebody says comics are a dying medium, and that's been happening since comics were created. But as I've said, comics aren't just superheroes, and they aren't just the books. I have, in my experience, a lot of people seem to think that comics are just these pieces of paper that kind of just come out of nowhere. It's just, there it is. It's a brand new issue of Spider-Man. But comics are pages. They are artists. They are writers. They are inkers. They are colorists. They are letterers. It's everything. In the old days, when you wanted to color a comic, the person in charge of that would make a sort of rough design, and then they would be sent to sort of sweatshop-esque facilities where anybody from the age of 30 to 64 would be working away, sloppily cutting out little prints of color sheets that they didn't plaster onto the papers. So that's why when you look at old comics, the coloring is a bit off on some of them, because you didn't need any special license or knowledge on how to cut these prints. But the most famous man, as I said, into the Silver Age, was Jack the King Kirby. And Jack Kirby, he was a monumental figure. If you're unaware of who he is, I highly recommend you check him out and look up his story. He created the Fantastic Four. He made Iron Man. He claims to have made Spider-Man, but that one's iffy. Pretty much every major character from Marvel at that birth point in the 60s, the early 60s, was done by Jack Kirby. But Jack Kirby really does not get the credit he deserves. That's because of something called the Marvel Method. And the Marvel Method is where the writer comes up with a basic plot idea, gives it to the artist, and the artist figures out how these pages are laid out, what happens in each panel. Imagine 20-ish pages, 15 to 20 pages at the time of story are done entirely by the artist, and then the writer would come in and have his way and add word balloons here and there. Of course, I am talking about Stan Lee. He really he kind of butchers a lot of stuff, if you ask certain people. But that was sort of a common practice, the Marvel Method. They might still do it, I'm not sure. It has the fascination of being almost a child's imagination filtered into the adult business of comics, but it is so twisted and just ruined so many careers, so many livelihoods, such as Jack Kirby's, who was just utterly disrespected in his field, where he has been called the king. Jack Kirby left Marvel Comics in the late 60s and went to DC. And that was a big thing because DC was like, oh my God, we have Jack Kirby. We'll let you do whatever you want. And they're expecting him to come on. He's going to do Superman. He's going to do Batman. He's going to do this and that and blah, blah, blah. He comes on and takes over their lowest selling book because he just wants to have fun with it. And he makes all new comics of characters that he created, not DC. So eventually he got disrespected there, and they started cutting back on how many issues he was getting, on how many pages and whatnot. You know, they're trying to make him quit, essentially. And quit he did. And guess what DC is doing now? They have a new event coming out called Absolute DC, which involves the greatest villain of all time, Darkseid, who was a Jack Kirby creation. So they are still fishing away at that beautiful creative ocean that was Jack Kirby. But then he would return in the 70s to Marvel, and he was disrespected there as well. 70% of his artwork was never returned to him after legal obligations filed to Marvel. They just so happened to disappear, or they ran out of them. They didn't know where they went. There's a story about a famous comic writer and creator getting caught stealing Jack Kirby's art in the middle of the night from the Marvel offices in New York. So it's a very depressing history of comics, is what comics is. It's such a dichotomy between the bright and vibrancy of these spandex-wearing superheroes who are wholly altruistic, and then you find out the dirty backstories behind how many people got screwed over, who didn't get credited, how much credit Stan Lee took, and it's very depressing, like I said. I don't want to have this be the sad note, but this is a uncomfortable reality with comics that I feel like as we continue on and the films get more and more popular, people just aren't really taking the time to learn about or figure out. Now, this next section is called Making Comics / Storytelling. Who here likes to storytell? Who wants to make stories? Anybody? Okay, thank you. I know you two love it. So with storytelling, I've always wanted to be a storyteller. I wanted to be a director when I was a child. I always wanted to make films. I wanted to make the next Jurassic Park, is what I always told my parents and grandmother. But then that didn't happen. But then I discovered comics, and now comics are far better. Like I was saying at the beginning, they're an incredible medium because the only budget you have with a comic is your imagination. That wonderful little thing that nobody's sure how it works, called the imagination, exists in our heads, and it is limitless. It is truly just an endless supply of ideas that you can strive from. And ideas, my belief is that they are a creator's worst enemy, the idea. Because they are intangible pieces that you can just kind of say, oh, I have this idea, I have that idea, I got a great idea, let me write that down in my notes. But you're never making anything if all you come up with are ideas. You're just kind of wallowing away in an endless cycle, treading the exact same water over and over again. And that's something I see that happens a lot, especially going to these conventions and seeing people online, is that they get too focused on the idea aspect of storytelling, of creating, whereas I just think that that's a really big issue. It's almost like a non-Newtonian fluid, which if you've ever seen the fun little science videos, it's usually made of cornstarch. That guy's nodding his head. He's a nerd. It's a liquid where if you slam it down, it reacts like a brick, but then if you sort of just settle into it, it sinks you down. I have an anecdote about someone I met online, and that is that they messaged me asking if I could critique their ideas for their draft of I believe it was either a novel or a comic or something. I'm not too sure what it was, because spoiler alert, they never made it. It was incredibly researched, it was very well documented, but it was never made. Every couple weeks he would send me a document, and it would just be endless notes. Oh, here's this character, and they do this, blah, 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 and they're researching nuclear reactors in Ukraine and how this worked in the 70s and this and that. Not once in I think about 2 months I was corresponding with this person, did I ever see any actual story be made. It was just that constant idea space. And that is possibly one of the hardest things to break out of, especially for people who are just creating. Because how many people, how classic is the joke, oh, I'm writing the next great American novel, or the joke of, oh, they're going down to Starbucks to write their screenplay. They just sort of sit in this no space of just nothing. And there's the idea that's there, though. And the idea is what that anchor is that is holding them down in that empty space. My next notes are to not read just comics. If there's anybody who wants to make comics here, don't read only comics, don't read only manga. Expand your library, expand your horizon. Don't listen to audiobooks, listen to whatever. Go into, read philosophy, read poetry, read just anything that's not comics to broaden yourself and your mind. It's like a muscle, your brain, obviously, but people really don't think about it this way. If you keep working towards these things, you read news articles, you read scientific articles. The New Scientist is something I've gotten into the past couple of years. It is absolutely insane and just ideas that are far more crazy than any comic could ever be. They're kind of talking about quantum theories, quantum this, that. Absolutely incredible. Don't just relegate yourself solely to only reading comics. Use the internet. It is the best era to ever make not just comics, but artwork and storytelling. Webtoons, other places like Substack, mini comics. You can just fold up a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, bam, staple it, you got a comic. You can go to little conventions. There's mini comic conventions. You can self-publish. Amazon has some sort of self-publishing initiative where I guess you send their files. I need to look into it. but it's a print-on-demand service. I'm self-publishing all of my books. It comes out of my wallet, unfortunately. And there's just so much you can do. There are contests like the Imaginary Friends Print Zoom contest here in town. They hold it every year where storytellers can come and you can collaborate, you can create your own books and submit it to them to get it published. That's what I did. I created a comic in 2020 called Destructo Boy and Other Exciting Tales, which were 3 short stories, one of which was about Destructo Boy, a little robot, and that was the most popular book, or the most popular story in that book, so I continued it. I got money from the sales of that first contest, and I put it back into publishing my own books and printing up these 5-issue series, which you can pick up at my booth right now, booth 20. And just advocate for yourself is another big thing. Advocate for yourself and for your work. Don't let people put you down, because everybody loves to put down an artist. Oh, you're studying art, huh? You should have told me that. Oh, you're going to work at a Starbucks, aren't you? How many times have you heard that? I once was working at something on a comic, and an old man came up to me and said, "Why are you doing this? Why don't you read a history book?" And then once I told him I plan on self-publishing and selling them, then he was like, "Oh, capitalism? That's great." So you can't let these slights and what people are saying put you down. You got to fight for yourself. There's a Teddy Roosevelt quote that I love, which is that the credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions? Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement? And who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly? And that is just a beautiful quote by one of my favorite presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, that I just think so well puts in. You can say that about anything, but I feel like art, especially in this environment, it really adheres to that sort of inner message, that inner turmoil that I believe we all have for creatives and wanting to storytell and make artwork. And speaking of art isn't about doing what people want. True art is about doing and making what you want. You are the very first member of the audience. So if it's working for you, if it entertains you, then at some degree it's going to work. My comic right here, The Custodians, Agents of Cross, is a book that I've been working on for almost 10 years. I came up with it in high school, and I know I look dashing and young, but I have been working on it for quite a while. And it just rewrites over and over again. I was stuck in that idea phase that really bogged me down. I would write 5 issues, scrap it because I hated it, write another 6 issues, scrap it because I hated it, until eventually 3 years ago, when I wrote these 2 issues and the rest of the 6-issue series, I finally got it. Now this is a book that is not going to be very popular to the mainstream audience. It is over 50 pages, it's 6 issues, 1960s aesthetic, so it even has fake advertisements littered throughout. It's a postmodern comic. It's not about Spider-Man, so that's going to be a big margin in my audience that's out of the way. It's not about Superman. It doesn't have skinny, buxom women in tiny little bikinis. So the audience is already going to be very skewed. But this is what I wanted to make. It's what I wanted to create, and that is what art is. Art is magic. And now I am segueing myself into the final session, magic. I truly do believe that art is magic. Hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, magic was referred to as the art. This is where I get weird and occulty and esoteric. There is a 14th century definition of the art or magic, which is, quote, art of influencing, this is the 14th century quote of magic. The art of influencing or predicting events and producing marvels using hidden forces. Aleister Crowley, a famous cultish magician in the 60s, described magic, which is magic with a K, hence why it's on the title of my panel. That is a ceremonial kind of magic, as, quote, the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. And isn't that what art is? Is art not truly magic? You take a piece of paper, which is nothing more than some wood pulp and chemicals mixed together and set so thin that you can just rip it apart. And then, if combined with this fascinating thing called ink, creates a simulation and imitation of whatever reality you want to create in this little 2D surface. Where does it come from? Art. It comes from our mind. And what does that mean? I don't know. That's why whenever you see somebody, author, filmmaker, whoever, artist, get asked, where do you get your ideas from? They always stammer and stutter and not really give an answer, because nobody knows where we get our ideas from. It's a fascinating subject where we don't even know what our brain is comprehending. Any art form is going to be magic. Music is magic. Writing, poetry, illustration, dance, painting, theater. It is all magical. It's shamanistic. It's alchemical. You're creating this change not just through what you're making, but into your audience and the people who see the very art itself. How many people here have been moved by a piece of artwork, been moved by a comic, a book, a film, anything? There's a alchemical response. Alchemy isn't, let's take some lead and make it into gold. It's, let's make art. These creative impulses, I feel, are something that is intrinsic to humanity. It's evident in our earliest sort of rituals and cave paintings. One of the oldest art forms, a cave painting. Somebody has this, who knows what it could have been, the reason that they painted a buffalo or a bison or a tiger or what on this cave, but they did. They had some sort of impulse to collect this information and stick it on that cave wall for the grog and og of the cave community to see. And it seems as though, I think that the art of creation is almost a natural state for mankind and humanity. It's a very natural feeling. Do you anybody here draw or paint or just writing and you feel yourself entering this trance, this euphoric mindset? And I feel there's got to be something there that has built on that upon eons of evolution and existence in our reality, that this is just a beautiful thing that has been passed aside thanks to the agricultural revolution and then the industrial revolution to where we are now. It's stomped out because it's not conforming with our sort of unnatural society. I could go on about that for a while, and I have with a buddy of mine, and it's come out to some pretty interesting thought experiments, but I'll save you the gander. Who here has heard the word glamour in reference to magic, enchantment, maybe Dungeons and Dragons? Glamour is its etymological origins, its origins as a word, comes from grammar. What about grimoire? Anybody familiar with the term grimoire? A book of spells and invocations. Comes from the same place, grammar. So right there, I feel, is a fairly good proof enough substantially that magic and art have become one and the same. In years of old, writers held a certain power to them. They could write about how big a man's nose is, and that's what he would go down in history as being known for. It's this sort of magical experience, writing. And if anybody was at my panel, my last panel I held here 2 years ago now, I know Ms. Catlin was, I discussed something called chaos magic, and chaos magic was something that I sort of believed in. It is, in essence, enforcing your will upon the universe via placebo effect means, but I believe there is some sort of real inner workings going on, at least in the mind. But after looking into it a little more, I just feel like it's an icky kind of way to go about performing magic. I don't think it should be. Magic should not be about enforcing your will upon the universe as much as it should be about the universe itself working and flowing through you, like that meditative state we all get in when we're really concentrated on a piece of art. Just let this ethereal, unknowable energy just course through you. And that, I believe, is what magic is. Chaos magic, you create a sigil, you draw a little image. It's this whole process. It gets kind of dirty if you look into it. And then you get rid of it, and that is supposed to send your will out into the universe. But if you say you make a sigil to get rich, but then you don't bother, you don't do anything, you just kind of sit around and do nothing, then nothing's going to happen. You don't make sigils to, practice magic to find a cute guy or girl to fall in love with you. That's nothing. And then you do nothing to work on yourself. You just write, I want to find a girl, I want a guy. And then you just send this, charge the sigil with your energy and whatnot, and then do nothing. You're not going to get anything. And if you are, that's sort of cosmic rohypnol. I did do that. I do have to admit, I did create a sigil many years ago to find myself in a loving and lasting relationship, and I charged it, and I did all the magical chaos magic hoo-ha that you're supposed to. And a couple months, 3 months later, so after I discarded it into the waters of my toilet and flushed it, I met a girl on Tinder, and I was like, oh my god, here we go, it's working. Nothing really came of that relationship, but then 3 months after that, I met my beautiful, now wife, and we have been in a relationship, just had our 6-year anniversary together. So, but is that magic? She doesn't think it is, but she's no fun. I believe, if you are going to look into this chaos magic thing, Grant Morrison, excellent source, don't look at it, like I said, as you're truly enforcing your will upon the universe. Look at it through how the universe reacts through you, how you can work on yourself, how you can make yourself and energize yourself to charge your own mind and your body to become what it is that you are properly striving for and want to have happen to your existence. Make you the way that you want to be. Feel the connection to the universe around you in a way that helps you and will hopefully get you to reach the goal that you desire. Finally, I'm getting close to the end here, wrapping it up with a window pane analogy. What does that mean? A window pane. If those curtains weren't there, we'd probably see some sunlight shining through, wouldn't we? Artists are the clean window panes that shine a beautiful ray of light through into our reality. But we're not what creates the light. We aren't the sun. We're just that perfectly correct width and height of a window pane, of a piece of glass that lets us shine through from an unknowable source of the imagination of the universe, of whatever you want to call it. And that light comes through us into our world to create a beautiful ray of light. And now for my closer, which is about a DC comic character called Gunfire. So in the 80s, there was a comic book character called Gunfire. It's really not helpful when you Google DC Gunfire. And his ability was that if anything he could grab, he could charge and then shoot out the very atoms of this entity, whatever he's holding. So in the comic, he picks up a ladder and he's shooting it like a gun, shooting these charged atoms of energy out at his villains. And he's like, the character Gunfire is so odd because he's like Bruce Wayne if Bruce Wayne was a red-headed guy with a big ponytail who wore glasses. And he's kind of a nerdy dude who just doesn't function well in society. His villains, one of them is just a man made of meat. What happened is, as I said, he charges these atoms and shoots them off. Gunfire thought it would be a good idea to grab his villain and explode him, but the villain came back. But that is DC's Gunfire. So that means, I always wondered, since I read it, he's never been really used again. I think they actually killed him off unceremoniously a couple of years ago. I always wanted to do something with Gunfire. I wanted to see how far can his atom energy whatever go. Because if he can pick up, like I said, this piece of paper, destroy its atoms, and boom, 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 shoot it out to fight crime or whatever, then what else can he grab a hold of? What happens if he goes out into the grass and just tucks his hands into the earth and just grabs and really tries himself out? What happens then? But then, of course, that thought process, as I'm laying there reading these books, led me to, well, what's the guy's sex life like? How does his power work? Does he have to really focus on these atom things, or is it like a sort of unconscious power and ability? Like if he grabs his girlfriend a little too long, is she going to blow up and become a meat suit? Who knows? But maybe someday if I work at DC Comics, I can write about it. And that has been my panel, The Magic of Comics. Thank you. Did anybody, I don't even know what time it is. I can't really read it.
It's 15:56. 3:56.
I don't remember what time this is supposed to go until. Who has questions? Who wants to talk? Anybody? Yes?
How much research should you do for like a time period, like for a setting?
Okay.
And then make it your own, like eventually like your own kind of time. Like if you do Western, how accurate does that have to be until you can make it your own?
Okay, so yeah, his question was how much research goes into, for example, a time period piece to make it my own. Interesting that you used Western. As I was telling these two, I created a 166-page Western comic that will never see published. That I did not as much research as you'd expect. I wanted to get the look more so than the feeling, but something that I am doing a lot of research on. I'm writing a, like I said at the top, a novel. It's a horror novel inspired by the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, which is an alien encounter from, I believe, the 70s or so. But my version is set in 1969 because I wanted to do some stuff with the Vietnam draft lottery and all this. But I just look up, I think, the basics. There's the tell-all phrase of write what you know, which I think I just look at it wrong or something because nobody agrees with me when I say it like this. It's not, write what you know doesn't mean you're a student in college. So that means all of your stories have to be about students in college. No, I think write what you know is taking these aspects of your real life, taking the people that you know, the events that you have gone through, experience you have had, and transferring them to these characters and these fictional events that you're creating. I'm doing that a ton in this book set in 1969. Just all you gotta do is change some stuff around. Instead of Converse, he wears Keds, I guess. But really, it's not that big of an issue unless I feel it's something very time specific. Like I said, the Vietnam thing. So I'm looking up dates of that. The Vietnam draft lottery was a terrible thing where they just randomly pulled people's names to get drafted. And that happened a couple of times. One of the early ones is on December 1st, 69. So I had to look up, stuff like that. But I feel like if you just look up pictures, if you just look up brands that were popular, just say there's nothing out of time, then I feel like it's not that big of an issue, especially if it's on a smaller scale story. Like if you have a world traipsing sort of story going on, then yeah, you probably want to look into what's going on. But this story is set in my novel is set in a small town in Kentucky. So really all that's sort of there is, they drive old cars, they talk bad, stuff like that. So it's not as big of a sort of issue as I think you might think. Hopefully that answered your question in some way.
No, yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
What do you consider a bad story?
That's hard.
Is that different for everyone?
I would say it is. I would say a bad story. So the question is, what do I consider a bad story? A bad story is something that doesn't grip the reader at all. Something that just feels poorly thought out, I suppose, might be the best way to put it. Something that doesn't have a sort of meaning, although you don't need meaning with stories. Everybody says, what's the meaning of your story going to be? I don't know what the meaning of my stories are going to be. When I write stories, I don't even usually have an ending in place. I just write as I go. But I feel, is this the music right in the off? What is this? Is this a Muppets thing? Anyway, a bad story, like I said, is just something that is just unformed and just really has nothing good going on for it. There was a story I worked with a couple of years ago. Hopefully nobody here knows that person that is listening. It's not a good story. I was hired to do pretty much all the illustration and coloring and lettering for it. but the story is just so nothing. It's just full one-dimensional characters who exist solely to exist in the story. They have no other reason of existing except for the fact that this has to happen to this person, and then this person comes in and reacts to it. That's a bad story. This story was also, what other issues were there? It just wasn't very well written, that's another thing, which is why I said at the beginning, don't just read like comics or anything, really expand your knowledge and your mindset. Bad stories, probably poorly drawn if it's a comic. Let's see, what else? I don't really know, that really is difficult. I think those are the main things I think of when I think of a bad story. But yeah. Hopefully that answered you in some way. Any other questions? Anybody have any questions about comics history, about my experience with magic and the occult, anything like that? Anybody? If not, oh, yes.
Would you say it's better to start with the characters and then like make a story around your characters?
That's another thing where it depends, I think. Because in my experience, like with the Custodians, like I was saying, I kept coming back to it and rewriting. That's because I started it off with the idea of this core group of characters, like 6 different characters, one of whom still appears in this. And I was so preoccupied with helping the audience know who these characters are and writing, oh, here's how they met and here's how the group was formed, this and that, blah, 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 that I never got around to any of the actual stories I wanted to tell, because I also had that issue. I have on my computer several dozen pages of notes and ideas for that original run, but again, it depends on what it is you're wanting to do. If you want to do like a long-running story or something along those lines, Love and Rockets is a famous comic series which is all about characters. It's slice of life stuff. If you want to do something like that, I think that character development and whatnot really works for that. What was the question again?
Should you do characters first?
Oh yeah, characters first with a story. If it's something like that where the characters are really going to be the focus of what's happening, not so much as like there's an event occurring, then I would say so. In my experience, a lot of the stuff that I've written, I come up with a title first and then sort of work it backwards from there. Like I was listening to a podcast or something, and one of the co-hosts just offhandedly said, blah, 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 the way the lions live. And that just immediately clicked into my mind, murder mystery. So please don't steal that. But I think if you can come up, do you have any experience or anything? Oh, okay. Yeah, it depends on the story that you're wanting to tell, I believe. And of course, your first story is not going to be a great story. Mine were never great stories. I'm still kind of ashamed of my Destructo Boys series, if I'm honest. It's never going to be good. It's always a stepping stone. It's always a way to learn and become better than yourself. There's nothing to be ashamed of if you do write a story where you focus on the characters first and it doesn't work. There's nothing to be ashamed of there. For some reason, we have come to believe that failing is a bad thing. I suppose it is if you go bankrupt, but really it's a learning experience. Yeah, hopefully that answers. Any other questions? Yes, Harlequin.
Do you ever have any kind of routine or anything help you get in the flow when you're going to write?
So the question is, do I have any routine or flow to get into when I write? Usually I lock the door and don't let anybody in. Sometimes I'll listen to music, like with the novel I was saying. I found a couple of like Spotify playlists that are up to about 1968, 1969. So I'll listen to that, get inspired. I worship 2 gods. There's no easy way to say that. I worship Hermes, the Greek god of communication and storytelling and commerce and whatnot. And I also worship the African spider god, Anansi. If you ever look at my ring, I have a silver ring with a golden spider on it. So I make some sort of offering or prayer to these deities that live in my head that sort of create this flow state that really, like I said, is it placebo, is it magic? Who knows, but it works for me. It gets me energized. It gets me invigorated. And as long as whatever you're doing is getting you energized and invigorated, as long as it's not killing a person, I guess, then I don't think you have to really worry about it. I have a very hippie mindset where as long as you're not hurting yourself or others or animals or anything, you're good to go. So yeah, that's usually what I do. Listen to music, sort of not do anything else. Sometimes I'll get so into writing that I won't eat. My wife will have to come in and yell at me. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Do you have any like warm-ups or like how do you start drawing for the day? Or what is your like favorite thing to draw?
My favorite thing to draw. It's definitely not horses or cars. If you ever want to make an artist mad, commission them to draw a horse riding a motorcycle. But the question is, do I have any warm-ups or anything to get me started? I've never actually done that. My warm-ups are just the panel of the page that I'm working on, really. I tried to in like high school and early college. You see online people are like, oh, well, if you want to learn how to draw an ear or a hand, just draw one of those 700 times over in an entire sketchbook. And I tried that for a page and I was like, I don't dig this. What's the point of this? I'll figure it out as I go. So no, I really don't. I just sort of go straight into it. Like just rough sketching, I suppose, is a way to get the flow if it's a new thing that I'm starting. But other than that, no, nothing in particular.
Nothing favorite to draw?
Oh yeah, favorite thing to draw. Not Spider-Man, that's for sure. He's a pain to draw. He has too many webs. I don't really think I have anything favorite. My favorite thing to draw are my own characters and my own stories. As I think that's everybody's. Any other questions? Anybody? All right, well, I think that is a wrap. You can open the doors and let them out now. Thank you all for coming. I really hope you enjoyed. And if anybody wants to continue talking, come by my booth.